At exactly 2:30 p.m., an explosion echoed through the third floor of the Pentagon. Security cameras captured four masked figures running down the corridor, but none of them noticed the ordinary secretary behind her desk slowly opening her drawer because nobody knew what had been hidden in that drawer for 20 years. Deanna Harper had mastered the art of invisibility. For 2 decades, she had been the perfect Pentagon secretary. Gray hair pulled back in a simple bun, reading glasses perched on her nose, sensible shoes that never made a sound on the polished floors. She arrived at 8 sharp every morning, organized files with methodical precision, and left at 5:30 without fail. Her colleagues considered her reliable but unremarkable. The kind of person whose presence you barely noticed and whose absence would go undetected for hours. The truth was far more complex. Diana Harper was one of the most accomplished intelligence operatives in modern history. But that story begins 25 years earlier, in a different country, with a different name. In 1999, a young woman named Shira Goldstein graduated from the Israeli Defense Forces intelligence program with the highest scores in the unit's history. She spoke 7 languages fluently, could pick any lock in under 30 seconds, and had reflexes that bordered on supernatural. Her psychological profile indicated perfect emotional control under extreme stress. She was exactly what Mossad needed for their most sensitive operations. Which city in the world are you watching this video from today? Please subscribe and support us for more stories. Shira's first assignment took her deep undercover in Damascus, where she spent 3 years posing as a jewelry merchant while mapping Syrian military installations. Her second mission brought her to Tehran, where she lived for 18 months as a university professor, documenting nuclear research facilities. Each operation required her to become someone else completely, to bury her true identity so deep that even she sometimes forgot who she really was. But it was her final mission that would define the rest of her life. In 2003, Mossad received intelligence about a planned terrorist attack on American soil. The operation was being coordinated through a network of sleeper agents embedded in various government agencies. Shira's assignment was unprecedented in its scope and risk. She would enter the United States under a completely fabricated identity and infiltrate the Pentagon itself. Creating Diana Harper took 6 months of meticulous preparation. Mossad forged an entire life history, birth certificate from a small town in Ohio that had burned down in the 1970s, taking most records with it, college transcripts from a state university known for its large anonymous student body, employment records from companies that had since been acquired and reorganized. Every detail was cross-referenced and verified through multiple sources. The transformation went beyond paperwork. Shira underwent minor plastic surgery to soften her features. She learned to walk differently, speak with a Midwest accent, and adopted the mannerisms of a middle-class American woman who had never traveled far from home. She studied American pop culture, learned baseball statistics, and memorized the plots of television shows she had never watched. When Diana Harper applied for a secretarial position at the Pentagon in late 2003, her background check revealed exactly what it was supposed to: a competent but unremarkable woman seeking stable government employment. Her typing skills were good but not exceptional. Her security clearance interview showed appropriate patriotism without any suspicious enthusiasm. She was hired within 2 weeks. The first months were the most dangerous. Every interaction was a test, every conversation a potential trap. Diana had to demonstrate enough competence to keep her job while remaining invisible enough to avoid scrutiny. She volunteered for overtime assignments that others found tedious, gradually gaining access to files and meetings that revealed the terrorist network's extent. What she discovered was worse than anyone had imagined. The network wasn't planning a single attack, but a coordinated series of operations designed to cripple American intelligence capabilities. They had infiltrated not just the Pentagon but the CIA, NSA. The attack was scheduled for December 2004, timed to coincide with the holiday season when government facilities would be operating with skeleton crews. Diana faced an impossible choice. Revealing what she knew would expose her identity and compromise future Israeli operations. But remaining silent would allow hundreds of American intelligence officers to die. She chose a third option, one that would require her to disappear forever. Working alone, Diana began sabotaging the terrorist network from within. She fed false information through compromised channels, causing coordination failures and suspicious arrests. She manipulated security protocols to prevent key personnel from being in targeted locations. Over 6 months, she systematically dismantled an operation that had taken years to construct. The planned attacks never happened. American intelligence agencies credited their success to improved cooperation and enhanced security measures. They never suspected that a secretary in the Pentagon had prevented one of the most sophisticated terrorist operations in history. But Diana's handlers in Tel Aviv knew the truth. They also knew that her cover identity had become too valuable to abandon. The Israeli government made a decision that would haunt them for decades. They declared Shira Goldstein killed in action during a classified operation and left Diana Harper to continue her mission indefinitely. For 20 years, Diana maintained her double life with extraordinary discipline. She attended office birthday parties and retirement celebrations. She contributed to charity drives and participated in evacuation drills. She developed genuine friendships with colleagues who knew nothing about her true identity. She dated occasionally but never seriously, claiming work was too important to her. Meanwhile, she continued feeding intelligence to Tel Aviv through a network so sophisticated that even Israeli handlers weren't entirely sure how it operated. She identified foreign intelligence assets, tracked weapons shipments, and monitored political developments that affected Middle Eastern security. Her reports influenced everything from military deployments to diplomatic negotiation. The psychological toll was immense. Diana had created such a perfect false identity that sometimes she forgot which thoughts and emotions belonged to Shira and which to Diana. She spoke Hebrew in her dreams, but had trained herself to wake up before anyone could hear. She observed Jewish holidays in private, lighting candles in her apartment while her colleagues assumed she was watching television. The deception might have continued indefinitely, if not for a single mistake. In 2023, a retired Mossad operative named David Rosen decided to write his memoirs. Among the classified operations he described was the infiltration mission that had officially killed Shira Goldstein. He included enough detail for foreign intelligence services to piece together what had really happened. Iranian intelligence, still seeking revenge for their compromised nuclear program, began systematically investigating American government employees who matched Shira's profile. They were looking for a woman of the right age who had appeared in the system around 2003 with a mysteriously clean background. Diana Harper fit the parameters perfectly. The morning of the attack, Diana arrived at work to find a white envelope on her desk. Inside was a single photograph, herself at age 25, in Israeli military uniform. No message was necessary. Someone knew who she was. Diana had perhaps 6 hours before the photograph would be shared with hostile intelligence services worldwide. She could run, disappear into another identity that Mossad had prepared for exactly this scenario. But 20 years of protecting her colleagues had created bonds stronger than any training could break. She wouldn't abandon them to face an attack alone. At 2:30 p.m., the explosion shattered the afternoon quiet. Diana's trained ear identified it immediately. A flashbang grenade designed to disorient rather than kill. The attackers wanted prisoners, not corpses. They were after intelligence, and they knew exactly where to find it. As alarms began wailing throughout the building, Diana opened her desk drawer for the first time in 20 years. Hidden beneath false documents and office supplies were items that belonged to Shira Goldstein, a ceramic knife that wouldn't trigger metal detectors, lockpicks disguised as hairpins, and a communication device smaller than a postage stamp. 4 figures in black tactical gear moved through the corridor with military precision. They had studied building schematics and guard rotations. They knew which offices contained the most sensitive information and which employees had the highest security clearances. What they didn't know was that the gray-haired secretary they passed without a glance was evaluating their weapons, counting their ammunition, and calculating attack angles. Diana allowed them to pass her desk, then stood and removed her reading glasses. The movement was fluid and silent, decades of muscle memory overriding years of careful disguise. She followed them at a distance, her sensible shoes making no sound on the polished floor. The attackers reached their target, the classified documents room, where sensitive intelligence reports were stored between distribution cycles. Their leader began placing shaped charges on the reinforced door, while the others maintained perimeter security. They were professionals, well-trained and disciplined. Under normal circumstances, they would have completed their mission and extracted within minutes. But these weren't normal circumstances. Diana stepped into the corridor behind them and spoke a single word in Arabic, loud enough to be heard over the alarms. The word meant death, and it was delivered with an accent that indicated formal military training. All four attackers spun toward the sound, weapons raised. What happened next took less than 30 seconds. Diana moved like water, flowing between their positions faster than they could track. The ceramic knife found pressure points with surgical precision. None of the attackers had time to fire a shot or call for backup. When Pentagon security forces arrived, they found four unconscious figures zip-tied with their own equipment and a gray-haired secretary sitting calmly at her desk, typing a report. Diana's official statement was simple. She had hidden in the supply closet when she heard the explosion and only emerged when security arrived. The attackers had apparently fought among themselves, perhaps over the division of whatever they had planned to steal. The unconscious men were identified as members of a Hezbollah cell operating out of Montreal. None of them regained consciousness quickly enough to contradict her story, but questions lingered. Security footage showed gaps that couldn't be explained by system malfunctions. The attackers' injuries were too precise to result from random fighting. Most puzzling of all, classified documents that should have been in the targeted room had somehow been relocated to a different floor hours before the attack, almost as if someone had anticipated what would happen. The FBI investigation concluded that luck and incompetence had prevented a serious intelligence breach. Diana Harper received a commendation for remaining calm under pressure and a small bonus for her quick thinking in filing important documents elsewhere. She accepted both with the same modest smile she had worn for 20 years. 3 days later, Diana submitted her resignation, citing health concerns and a desire to spend more time with family she had never mentioned having. Her colleagues threw her a farewell party complete with cake and speeches about her dedication and reliability. She seemed genuinely moved by their words, and perhaps she was. The line between Diana Harper and Shira Goldstein had blurred beyond recognition. Diana Harper moved to a small coastal town in Maine, where she bought a cottage and began volunteering at the local library. Her neighbors found her friendly but private, the kind of person who kept her past to herself, but was always willing to help with community projects. She seemed to be exactly what she appeared, a retired government worker enjoying a quiet life by the sea. The truth was more complicated. Diana's cottage was equipped with communication equipment that would have impressed professional intelligence agencies. She maintained contact with handlers in Tel Aviv, though the nature of her reports had changed. Instead of military secrets and political intelligence, she now provided analysis of American social trends and economic developments. Her insights, informed by 2 decades of deep cover experience, were valued by analysts trying to understand how American policy might evolve. More importantly, Diana had begun reaching out to other deep cover operatives who had spent decades living false lives in service of their countries. She created a network of support for people who had sacrificed their identities for national security and found themselves adrift when their missions ended. Some were Russian illegals who had been abandoned after the Cold War. Others were Chinese assets who had lost contact with Beijing. A few were American operatives whose own government had forgotten they existed. The network operated through encrypted channels and coded messages hidden in seemingly innocent online interactions. Members shared resources for building new identities, techniques for managing psychological stress, and most importantly, the understanding that came from shared experience. They were ghosts, helping other ghosts find their way back to the land of the living. Diana never revealed her true identity to the network, but her expertise in identity creation and operational security made her invaluable to operatives trying to build genuine lives after years of deception. She helped arrange medical care for people whose real names didn't exist in any database. She created financial instruments that allowed earnings from false identities to be transferred to real ones. She even facilitated reunions between operatives and family members who had believed them dead for decades. The work gave Diana something she had never expected to find, a sense of purpose that belonged entirely to her rather than to any government or ideology. For the first time in her adult life, she was helping people not because orders demanded it, but because she chose to do so. The distinction mattered more than she had anticipated. 5 years after leaving the Pentagon, Diana received an unexpected visitor. David Rosen, the retired Mossad operative whose memoirs had triggered the chain of events that ended her mission, appeared at her cottage on a gray October morning. He looked older than his photographs, worn down by decades of secrets and the weight of decisions made in service of national survival. Rosen had come to apologize, though he knew apologies couldn't restore the life Diana had sacrificed or erase the years she had spent living as someone else. He had also come to offer her something no intelligence agency could provide: acknowledgement. Official recognition of her service was impossible, but he wanted her to know that her contributions hadn't been forgotten by the people who mattered. Diana listened without speaking, then made coffee and sat across from the man who had inadvertently ended her career. They talked for hours about the cost of intelligence work, the impossibility of normal relationships, and the strange loyalty operatives felt toward countries that would deny their existence if necessary. It was the first honest conversation Diana had experienced in over 20 years, and she found it both liberating and terrifying. Before leaving, Rosen shared a final piece of intelligence. Iranian services had never stopped looking for the operative who had compromised their nuclear program. They knew she was alive and living somewhere in America under an assumed identity. Her photographs circulated regularly through networks of assets and sympathizers, accompanied by standing orders to report any sightings immediately. Diana thanked him for the warning, though they both knew she had been operating under that threat for years. Survival had become such an ingrained habit that she hardly remembered what it felt like to live without constantly calculating escape routes and monitoring surroundings for potential threats. That night, Diana sat on her cottage porch, watching waves crash against the rocky coastline. She thought about the young woman who had joined Israeli intelligence with dreams of serving her country, and the middle-aged secretary who had prevented a terrorist attack while protecting the only identity she had left. Both women seemed like characters from someone else's story now, memories viewed through glass rather than lived experiences. Diana Harper would continue living quietly in her coastal town, helping other lost operatives find their way home while building something resembling a real life from the fragments of her constructed identity. She would never be entirely free from the possibility that someone would recognize her face or connect her to operations that officially never happened. But she had learned to find peace in uncertainty, purpose in helping others, and identity in choices made freely rather than orders followed blindly. The secretary who had fooled everyone for 20 years had finally found a way to stop fooling herself. It wasn't the ending anyone would have predicted for Shira Goldstein or Diana Harper, but it was an ending she had chosen for herself. In the world of intelligence operations, that kind of choice was rarer and more valuable than any medal or recognition could ever be. Some secrets are worth keeping, not because they protect governments or operations, but because they protect the human beings who carry them. Diana Harper understood that truth better than most, and she guarded it as carefully as she had once guarded classified documents and false identities. The greatest deception of her career wasn't the one that fooled Pentagon security or terrorist networks. It was learning to be honest with herself about who she really was and what kind of life she wanted to live. The cottage by the sea wasn't much, but it was hers in a way that no identity document or cover story could ever be. For a woman who had spent decades being someone else, that authenticity was worth more than any secret she had ever protected or any operation she had ever completed. Diana Harper had finally come home to herself, and that was the most successful mission of all.